Good morning. It's wonderful to be here with all of you this morning. Minister, thank you for gracing this occasion. I want to start by thanking the EAI and the ISAS for inviting me to this discussion on India-China relations and how we can promote them. I would like to remind our audience here, Singapore has long taken initiatives over the last 30 years to act as a bridge between India and China in different times and different formats. There have been a series of initiatives, and I think this one is again a new one, and I hope this initiative will bear productive results. Second, I think we certainly need initiatives from our friends like Singapore, because today India-China relations are in a bit of a crisis mode, and I think we've seen some signs of relaxation, as the Minister said, but I think there's a lot more effort needed to bridge the differences that exist between India and China today. But before I proceed, let me just make one important caveat, that is, when we speak about India and China in the same breath, it would give you impression that India and China are equal. We're not. Chinese GDP today is $18 trillion. India is at barely reaching 4 trillion. So the gap between India and China is real, is significant and substantive, and I don't see this bridging anytime soon in the near future. So I think we got to understand this asymmetry in the power between China and India, and the fact that, as far as we are concerned today, China is the bigger brother. So while we are siblings, we are Asian siblings, we are Asian brothers, with a long history of trying to build a cooperative architecture in Asia. But I think it's important to understand China is the bigger player today. China is a risen power, while India is rising slowly. And I think when we talk about India becoming the third largest economy in the next few years, it's likely to happen pretty soon, because the German economy has slowed down, Japanese currency has fallen. So I think it's just a matter of time before India becomes the third largest economy. But India is going to be a very, very distant third to China. US and China are at the top. India is there, emerging, but I think the gap between India on the one side and US and China on the other would continue to remain very, very significant. So what I want to do in the next few minutes is really to focus on the complex dynamic that has emerged at this point between India and China, and why we need to overcome that in the coming years. What we've seen happen over the last decade really is a resumption of the renewed crisis on the border, which is a long disputed border between India and China. It's almost 3,500 kilometers. We've seen a series of military crises in 2013, 2014, 2017, and 2020. Now, I think there's been a fresh attempt at the last crisis. We're trying to resolve that crisis. An important first step has taken, but I think this problem that 75 years after independence, we still have not settled the boundary dispute, I think is a serious issue that both sides will have to figure how to take it forward. Second, I think, is the growing security dilemmas between the two sides. That is, for example, the power gap, which I mentioned between India and China, means that power gap creates an imperative for China to engage in balancing behavior. That is, work closer with the United States. In restructuring, I mean, you've seen India has become a part of the Quad. It's closer to the US than it's ever been before. But at the same time, the fact that we are neighbors, the fact that we share a region demands that we must find ways for peaceful coexistence. Americans will come and go. We've seen the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, the French, everybody has come into this region and gone. But India and China are going to be here. So I think as large neighbors, as the world's most populous nations, irrespective of what the third parties might do here, I think there is a big responsibility on India and China. We need to find that imperative of peaceful coexistence, and I think that's a very, very critical element. So I think both these imperatives are at work. Because of the breakdown of trust over the last decade that we need today to restore that trust between India and China, and to overcome the security dilemmas that exist. I mean, China views Quad with suspicion, while India fears China is a bigger power. Chinese military spending is now 4 times bigger than India's. So therefore, the need to reach out to other powers to balance, I think that imperative is there. But I think we need to figure out a way in which we can live together because we both belong to the region. Equally important is the fact that since we are in the same region, the need to avoid friction. China has risen. China has ambitions of its own, legitimate ones, to be a major power in the international system. So has India. China is nationalist. India too is nationalist. But I think we can't allow this nationalism to allow problems, disputes to become, differences to become disputes, and to allow them to escalate into actual military conflicts. So therefore, resolving the security dilemmas as well as understanding each other's relationship with the third parties, especially the US, becomes very, very important. Here, I think it's important to note that India has not allowed the Quad to become a military alliance. India is not a treaty ally of the United States. It will remain an independent power through the international system. And I think that should give some confidence to China that India is not going to join hands with the US to contain China or to surround China. Similarly, I think China will have to make sure that India feels secure in front of a larger power. As I said, China is a bigger brother. China has much stronger military today than India has. Therefore, I think there are imperatives on both to resolve their disputes and reduce the friction that has emerged, whether we like it or not. A third, I think, the agenda that this symposium has set for itself on the economic cooperation. What we've seen in the last 20 years has been, as the minister pointed out, there's been a dramatic expansion of India-China trade. Today is close to $120–130 billion. But here is a problem, that it is deeply asymmetric. That almost India now has a trade deficit of nearly $100 billion every year. So this almost is 1/3 or 1/4 of India's total trade deficit is with China. So I think this is a major friction, and I think that has emerged over the years. And I think here is the paradox. India needs Chinese imports in order to continue to export, to become a manufacturing power. At the same time, that it cannot be forever as a large economy to cede completely its manufacturing to imports from China. And I think there's a big debate going on in India. How does it deal with this problem? Is there a way India-China can collaborate in a way that Chinese investments perhaps in India, manufacturers within India, can that overcome? But this is a very difficult debate, a debate that between our business community, our commercial interests, while the security ministries see the tension that how do we find a way to bring in greater synergy between China's rise on the economic side and India. Meanwhile, here again, they talk about is India going to be another China? It's not going to be another China. We are two large countries. I think each of us will have to develop our own model for economic growth. So it's not going to be, India is not going to be a copy of China, because the nature of the society, the nature of the polity is very, very different, and the economic strategy that India pursues will also have to be, is also different. So therefore, there are some who want India to be like China, who get disappointed. The others who say, look, India is never going to be a China. But the fact is, India will grow. So I think to avoid this simple narratives of is India next China or is India can never be China, to one of saying India's growth is taking place at 7%. India will continue to grow by the end of this decade. It will be close to $7–8 trillion. And eventually, Mr. Modi's ambition to make India a developed nation by 2047 means getting to at least $35 trillion of GDP and a per capita income of at least $10,000 to $12,000. That's ambition that India has set for itself. So India might not, whether it reaches the goal or not, that India is going to be a bigger economy. It's going to be, as we said, is the third largest, never going to be equal to China, but it's going to be a fairly significant economy on the ground. Similarly, on a range of new areas, on technology especially, India's contributions to the international system are rising. And I think there you see the extraordinary connections that have emerged between Indian technology ecosystem and the Silicon Valley, and how that might become a major force in reshaping the technological revolution in the international system. So therefore, I think here we are. I mean, China too is even a bigger technological power. So given these contradictions, I mean, how do we work through this? Is an ambition that our ISAS and EAI have set for themselves. Here, I'd like to recall that almost 100 years ago, when the first political contact between Chinese national movement and the Indian national movement was at the Brussels Anti-Imperialist Congress in 1927. So at that point, I mean, Nehru himself was leading the Indian delegation. The idea that the two delegations issued a joint statement, it's always worth reading that, for the high ideals that it set for itself, that they set for themselves, that look, colonialism is going to fall, imperialism is going to retreat, and that in the future, India and China need to come together to build a post-Western order, an order in which India and China will work together to transform the international system, certainly beginning with Asia. But I think it's a fact, unfortunately, that ambition has repeatedly faltered because of the way they related to third parties like the Soviet Union or the United States at different phases, different types of relations. But I think today, as we look ahead, I think India and China both need to find ways of overcoming, or at least managing their disputes, so that they don't become violent disputes of the kind that's happened a few years ago. And I think that's where, as the minister said, the resumption of political dialogue at the highest level between India and China is a good sign. And I think what we need is really to build on this. In this case, I mean, I think, as we said, managing the boundary dispute, avoiding conflict on this long, high Himalayan border, to addressing the security dilemmas that exist within the region. And I think there we need a lot more dialogue, not just bilateral, but with our Asian friends, our friends in the Indian Ocean. I'm not one who believes, look, Indian Ocean is India's ocean or South China is China's sea. That both of us are going to expand our footprints across the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific, whatever you want to call it. So therefore, I think we are going to be, if China is going to be a $20 trillion economy and India is going to be $6, $7, $8 trillion economy, their footprint is going to grow. I think that's the reality Delhi and Beijing have to manage. And I think in managing that, we need all our friends to pitch in to help this process. And finally, on the economic issue, this is really the biggest imperative at this point of time, because for India, in the end, all this is about generating prosperity for its people. China has achieved those goals, but I think at a time when the geoeconomics is fundamentally being restructured, when we have actually, as Lily pointed out, US is taking a pickaxe to the world order, what they themselves built, that at this point of time, is there a way when US is going to fundamentally rewrite the global economic order? Is there a way in which India and China can collaborate to bring stability to their own bilateral relationship, as well as bring a framework within Asia where the region can prosper? That this region has prospered immensely in the collaboration between US and China over the last 4 decades. Now today, US and China are in a conflict. But I think as India rises, I think the region has a role in shaping that relationship, as well as benefiting from that relationship. And I think that is the challenge, and I really wish ISAS and EAI really all success in imagining a very different future for our relationship with the economy at the center of it. So thank you, and thank you for your attention.